Hello, everyone. Welcome. Give everyone a little bit of time. Thank you for joining us today. We'll wait a minute or so, and then we will start. While we're waiting, you can put in the chat where you're from, what you do, what your title is, and what you're excited about. What does amazing math look like to you? People from all over. Very exciting. Okay, everybody, welcome to the next session in our What Amazing Math Looks Like series. We're so excited to have you today. And we'll run through a few housekeeping items before we get started. So some helpful tips for today's session. If you'd like to access closed captioning, please hit the CC button in the bottom tray and then just show subtitles. You can participate and make comments at any time via the chat box. But if you would like to submit questions for Kristin to answer, the best way to do that is through the Q&A function. We'll have dedicated time at the end to answer all those wonderful questions. And then lastly, you will receive a certificate of attendance with your webinar recording via Zoom email and the next day or so after the session. So I'm going to introduce our wonderful speaker today, Kristin. She is the Executive Director of our Math Suite at Amplify and previously served as the Director of K-5 Curriculum and Professional Learning at Illustrative Mathematics. She is also National Board Certified 22-year veteran teacher and coach of grades K through 8. So she's done it all, seen it all, been in the classroom, helps us out in loads of ways at Amplify. And her continuous curiosity around students' mathematical ideas drives her work in designing instructional materials that create a coherent, engaging mathematical story for all the students. So with that, I will flip it over to Kristin to get started.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I'm just going to take over the screen. All right. Thank you all so much for being here this afternoon. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, something that is not in my bio, but is relevant to this work is 2 parts of 2 days of my week as part of my role at Amplify is being in a classroom with teachers and students. So on the first day that I'm there, I plan with grade level teachers in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. The second day of that week, I go back and I teach with them. So we co-teach the lessons. We reflect together. And so it is a cycle of collaboration that I'm working in every week with teachers. And I'm sure, as many of you can imagine, the topic of our conversation really often revolves around the collaboration that we want students to have in the classroom. So this topic, like I said, is something that I think about every time I'm in the school with teachers and then in turn working with students. So I'm really excited to have the chance to talk with you about that today. I sat when I was preparing for this webinar and just jotted down what questions I think about often when I'm going in to plan with teachers or I'm going in to co-teach lessons with them and work with students. And these 3 bubbled right up to the top. So I thought these would be the most natural focus for our work together today. First, we're going to talk about why is collaboration important? Secondly, how can we support student collaboration? And then I want to spend just a tiny bit of time at the end talking about how we can support educator collaboration, because I think that is one of the most critical areas in teaching and learning for us to really focus on how do we learn together with and from one another in our teaching. So with that, why is collaboration important? And I thought I would start like we start most lessons by asking students and asking you to draw on your prior experiences. So I just want you to picture a classroom, whether you taught it or you were coaching or you were in observing it, that you would say is highly collaborative. So picture a math classroom that's been highly collaborative when you walked in. And I want you in the chat just to drop in some things. When you walked into that classroom, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? And what are students working on? So I'll just give you a minute in the chat. You picture that classroom. What types of things are you seeing, hearing, and what are students working on? Lots of talking, lots of discourse, math vocabulary. I like the really specific example. Someone is saying, explain that. I love it. Seeing students work in partners or in pairs, small groups, genuine curiosity. Love that. I love the use of the word productive in there. I think about that a lot, of how we define a productive. Collaboration. Students are leading the discussion, explaining the why. Students are excited. I love that. And Molly, that is such a perfect one to end on, making connections, because I was thinking, as I just jotted down, I just did this activity myself and just thought about what I would be seeing and hearing. And everything seemed to fall under this bucket of different types of connections students were having in this collaborative moment. Students were connecting to experiences, their prior experiences, what they're currently experiencing in that moment with the mathematics. When they're collaborating, they're connecting mathematical ideas, maybe representations, how they thought through a problem, something they're connecting from a prior mathematical understanding to now. And they're connecting to one another's ideas, which is really an important and critical part that I saw threaded through so many comments in the chat, is this communication and discourse. And that is not only just sharing ideas, but also listening and internalizing what others are saying. So collaboration really supports connections. And we know connections is critical in mathematics in so many ways. When we think about the mathematics itself, there's a paper called Practicing Connections by Stigler et al. And I just thought that these were really crucial ideas about the mathematics. And the paper is just about what types of connections should students practice in math class. And three of them he really highlighted throughout the entire paper: connections with context and practices in the world. So I see that kind of as connecting to prior experiences and what we know ourselves. Connections with core concepts that organize the domain, so connecting mathematical ideas. And then connecting key representations, and that could be connecting with ideas of others. So these three really, I thought, grounded the work of why are connections so important, and in turn, why is collaboration an integral part of pulling out and eliciting these connections. And then when we think about students attending to one another's ideas, I did just want to give one more piece that I think really supports this. There's been a lot of work, so I just pulled from sources that I think are really powerful. NCTM, of course, talks a lot about mathematical conversations and building shared understandings. Teaching Children's Mathematics talks about discourse as supporting metacognition, and it teaches students skills of how to discuss and debate and reevaluate situations. And then we have NCTM again, in terms of students, just really everybody's ideas are valued in the classroom. So this idea of connection is all through the math literature. And I think collaboration is the tool in which these connections really come to life in our classrooms. And of course, I always like to ask students what they think whenever I'm talking on any topic. So when I asked my third graders why they thought it was important to work together in math, I got just, I mean, I could have made a whole slide deck of their responses. So I just pulled two. I practiced restraint, but it was important to work together because if you work together, you can get smarter by other people's ideas. And I think working together is important because it's more fun if you can know your friends better. And I think these two responses to me, while all of them were so good, these two really just brought to the top how social mathematics is and how much the math can center these relationships between students, and they get to know their friends better. But we also know that collaboration is hard in classrooms. If it were just as easy as turn and talk to your neighbor and just have them put them in small groups and have them talk to one another, then this webinar could be an email. Because it is so challenging, and even students notice that it's challenging, because when I ask them the flip side of this question, what makes working together challenging in math class sometimes? It's hard because some people disagree. And I think working together is hard because people might not listen and they might be bossy. And so there's so many dynamics at play when we want students collaborating around the mathematics that is beyond the mathematics itself. It's about how students interact with one another. So collaboration is really, really complex. And I think students need a lot of things, and this is just the things they need before we're even in the mix of collaborating, because we know as a teacher, there are so many other things that are going to happen as students are collaborating. But in order to even just start to collaborate, we need to plan and we need to think about tasks that are worth talking about. We need to think about the community in our classroom and structures that allow for rough draft ideas. Shout out to Mandy Jansen. If you have not read Rough Draft Math, it is a beautiful book about sharing ideas in progress. And they need opportunities to share their ideas, actively listen to the ideas of others. And they need, at the end of that, to connect and be able to revise these ideas. And it's easy sometimes to get stuck in one of these places for the majority of your class period. So it's really hard as a teacher to navigate all the different time and spaces for all of them. Rough Draft Math, and it's Mandy Jansen. Amanda Jansen is the author of that one. Sorry, I saw that in the chat, so I thought I have it open, so I thought I would just shout that out. All right, how can we support student collaboration? So we know it's not easy, students know it's not easy, but we can think a lot about how we support students in this collaboration with just some structures. So the first thing we're going to think about is which task do we think would support a highly collaborative environment with students in our math class. So some of them are going to be explicit, like they will just stand out as this task is going to be a collaborative task. And I just wanted to get a sense in the chat of which one you think that might be. We have task A, where students are asked, they're going to take paper clips and they're going to lay them all around the outside. They're going to estimate how many it would be beforehand. And then they're going to check their estimates and show or explain their reasoning. I don't even have to get to B. You can probably just tell by the look of it. And then there's B, where they're determining the perimeter of each shape, and the distance between the dot or tick marks are both 1 unit. So as you can tell, A is the one that, to me, it does also. It's kind of that task that just jumps out at you as it would just be collaborative in nature. But we are going to get to task B, because I think it is an interesting thing to think about how we take tasks that don't jump out as a highly collaborative task and think about structures we can put around it. So we're going to get to B, but we're going to jump into A first. So I want you to imagine you give this task to students. What would happen in a classroom where the collaboration is, we have structures in place, and it's going beautifully? What would you see for task A? What would students be doing? And you can just put it in the chat. Good, I see really specific, putting paper clips up, lining them up, explaining their ways of estimating, defending their estimates, testing, conjecturing, conferring with one another. I love all of these things. Thinking out loud, collaborating. asking if they can be unfolded, or they would just be unfolding those paper clips too. Yes, I think all of those things are what I would imagine would be happening as well. And I think we also know on the opposite side of that, if we don't have structures in place and we haven't thought about the ways in which students collaborate, that we could give them a task and say, work with your partner, and one student could take over all of the work for everybody. And we know the different things that happen, or they could just sit and work independently and just share their answer when they're done. So there's a lot of ways collaboration needs to be set up. This task naturally kind of sets it up by having them estimate first and then check and explain. So it sets up a little bit of the to-dos. But there's still some stuff to do. Like I said, if you give them just the task and said, have at it, we never know what could happen in terms of them talking to one another. So before, we always want to give them independent work time, independent thinking time. It's hard for people to jump into a task right away and start collaborating when you haven't had time to just think about it for yourself for a moment. So you always want to provide some independent work time on any task, if it's even a highly collaborative task or not. And this is what Phil Darrow said to me one time, which I had never had explicitly said to me before, but it made so much sense and it was opposite of what I would typically do. But he said, stop students before they're finished. And so I think what I would usually do is I would give them independent work time. I would monitor the room and I would tell them to turn and work with their partner when most of them were almost finished. They had gotten pretty far in the task. And then what would happen is they would turn to one another and say, I got this. Okay, I got this. And then that would be the extent of their collaboration. And so this idea of being really purposeful and being upfront with the students, tell them, I'm going to stop you before you get very far, but I want you to think about the task, try some things out, and then I'm going to stop you. So don't worry, you're not expected to be finished. But it really helped step up the collaboration in my classroom because I stopped them and they needed to finish it together at that point. While they're collaborating, monitor and ask questions, which we all know. We want to dig into their thinking. And we want to keep track of the time and energy. Sometimes collaboration can be so good and we sit and we're talking to one student and the energy level, I know we all know the feeling, I can picture it. The energy level starts to come down and then we've kind of lost the momentum of the collaborative moment that's happening. So you just want to keep track of the energy in the room and the time. Sometimes if we let that go on too long, many other conversations are happening. We've lost focus of the mathematics and then it takes longer to pick it back up and bring it to the forefront again. And then after, we want to make connections explicit through the work that students are doing. So as you're monitoring, asking questions, we're looking for the relevant mathematics that we want to highlight at the end. And we're going to pull those from the students to make the connections explicit. Because sometimes it's easy when we get into these big problem-based classrooms to let ideas just kind of linger out there. So we just want to make sure that we're explicit with students about the ideas through their work. So I have a video of different moments, this task in a class in my third grade classroom. So I'm just going to ask you in the chat if you just want to watch and listen. That's great. If you notice something that is a moment of something they're doing or saying that's highlighting important collaboration moments, feel free to drop them in the chat as well.
We read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
So that.
Nice.
And see how.
I did it. Nice. Put a circle. It's not. I was right.
Okay, you were correct. You were correct.
How many are on this side? What are you gonna do to your teeth? How are you gonna do it?
Wait,
It's literally
hold on.
Are they helpful at all?
no.
No.
I don't even understand why I did it.
Princess, why do you think it's helpful to do that?
It's like a guideline for the next paper. I got the guideline. Like many. It's like a guideline.
And what do you mean it's a guideline for the next paper?
So if like one is here and I mark it, like if I didn't mark it, you wouldn't know where the next paper clip would go.
Yeah.
I think I understand what she was trying to do.
What was she trying to do?
The lines help you place them.
Oh, they're doing.
So basically, I remember what I did on the thing where we had to use the paper clip.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember what me and Kevin did, so now I'm using this strategy.
The same strategy, and so you're just labeling the space.
And I thought it was, oh, the joy, they were so great. I mean, I could watch this video and just smile over and over and over again. The moments I saw before I go on to the next task, moments that I saw that really highlighted collaboration. It's always the leaning in for me. They're on each other's papers and there's not a get off, or it feels like this paper is our paper and we're working together. And they're both writing ideas. One's writing ideas while the other is contributing. I feel like that is so important and such a big sign of collaboration. The end moment when Braden says, I use the idea that Kervins and I did, and I remember how Kervins and I did it, and I'm using that strategy here. So they're listening to one another's ideas and strategies. Or Charlie, when she was going, I don't even know why these tick marks are, why am I doing this? And Princess being able to chime in and saying, this is why we do it. It's a guideline. This was third grade. So the collaboration in that classroom, and I'm not their classroom teacher. I come in 2 days a week, but their classroom teacher has set up such a community of, they made mistakes and they laugh and they fix them and they move on. And it's just, she's set up such a beautiful structures and environment in that classroom that it's easy for me to come in and plan with them and teach and have these moments. But it definitely takes constant reinforcement, because there will be moments where we want to share an incorrect response and put it up there. And we have to know that students are safe with us doing that, and creating that environment really supports us being able to do that. That was just a video. I thought that was nice to see, just small moments. And I tried even, what you do one time is you should record your classroom and then turn the volume off and just watch the students work together. And so you're not hearing all the things. And when I played it a couple of times without the volume on, and it's just interesting what collaboration looks like without noise, and then once you add the noise, how that adds a different layer to it. But it gives you a nice sense of what does it look like to collaborate with one another. So now on to task B. This is the one where we're determining the perimeter of each shape. And again, this is one at face value. When you look at it, you go, this looks like an independent practice task where students would be doing this one individually, and it absolutely could be. I'm not saying that every task has to be collaborative. There are definitely moments where we want students doing things independently, and then there's moments where we want them collaborating. So, but if we did want to use this one as a moment where we wanted students to collaborate on it, there's different structures that we can put around these tasks. And this is where a really great curriculum will have these tasks already, in place for you, and they'll have great teaching structures around them to support this. But when you look at a task, if you want to add structures around it for either more discourse, something you could do is before you start the task, when you launch it, you could ask students, what questions do you have? And what does this remind you of? And that's really connecting on those prior experiences. So just show it to them. And it could be, it reminds me of the paper clips that we used. I'm wondering what the tick marks mean. Why is it tick marks and that one and dots on that one? And it gets all the ambiguity out for students as well. So just putting something up and saying, what questions do you have for me? What does this remind you of? That's a really nice way to launch into this talking about tasks and collaborating with one another. So those are great before questions. And then as they're working, use the routines purposefully. I know I've always, and I still do make this mistake of saying, turn and talk to your neighbor about whatever problem I have up. And then when we come back and we're a whole group discussing and nothing is to the point what I thought what I had in mind for them to talk about, I just have to then keep refining my question. And I've gotten to being really purposeful for the turn and talks. If I want them to talk about a particular thing, turn and talk to your neighbor about. And that really helps set up the conversation that you want students to have. Another routine that I really liked is called a go round, and I'm gonna get to that in just on the next slide. But it's a nice structure for listening, because another the challenging part, and even I know as myself as an adult, listening is hard. Sharing your ideas can be quite easy. Listening and really taking in what others are saying without just responding is something that is really, you have to actively think about doing it. So with turn and talks, I could say turn and talk to your partner about how you label the length of each side. That would get at, are they labeling the tick marks? Are they labeling the length unit between those tick marks or dots? So that if that's the thing I want them to attend to, because as I walked around, I saw students doing one or the other, that might be something I want them to turn and talk about. Another thing in that activity that we did prior, we were writing equations of how they calculated the perimeter. So something you could ask also, if you wanted to focus more on the equations, you could say, turn and talk to your partner about how your equation matches the labels. So if you labeled, your side lengths with numbers, where are those numbers in your equation? So just going back and forth between the representations that students had used, but be really specific for students, it helps. In a go round, and if you imagine a small group of 4 working together, you would tell them to go around your table and listen as each person shares where they are in their thinking right now. And that thinking can be, I've gotten this far, but now I'm stuck here because, or I've gotten this far and my next step I think I'm going to do is this. So where they are in their thinking right now can mean many things. It doesn't have to be, I'm thinking I'm getting to the right answer right now. It's just, where am I thinking? What am I confused about? What do I know I do next? And then everyone has a chance to ask questions, and then they finish the problem together. So again, it's pausing them before they're completely finished and having them go around. It really, I've never seen students listen as much to one another until they have those types of structures. And if nobody's ever tried a talking point activity, it's the same type of structure where they're really, by structure of the activity, forced to listen to others and then ask questions. It's a really nice activity for students. And again, you don't want to use it all the time, but if it's maybe a problem that you think might be a little tricky for some students, it really is helpful to just pause and have them articulate, where am I stuck in this particular problem? And then their classmates and everybody jumps in and solves it together. It sets up a really nice collaboration moment for students. And then again, just going back to what would make this, I think, a really interesting collaborative into making the mathematics explicit. For that particular rectangle, we had these 3 students all get 22. However, and the top 2 just counted in different ways, which is interesting. Having them, how they labeled their counts is interesting. Even the top one, he didn't need to count the side and the bottom because it was a rectangle. So he goes, oh, once I knew that was 9, this one's 9. Once I knew that's 2, that one's 2. So that labeling is just intricately interesting. And then the one right underneath of it is labeling every length unit with a number. And then the third one down there counted the dots or tick marks on each side. So having that conversation with the 3 of them, if I said, turn and talk to your group about how you labeled your sides, now I'm really zooming into the mathematics that I want to bring to highlight. If I just said, turn and talk to your partner about what you did, it might not necessarily bring out the mathematical idea. So we can be really purposeful with the routines or the structures that we put around these activities to have students collaborate and then zoom in on the mathematics that is the goal of our lesson that day. So for the last 15 minutes, we're going to talk a bit about teacher collaboration. And again, I'd love to just hear really quick from you in your school or in your, if you're in a school or if you're in a district level as well, how do you collaborate with one another, whether it be teachers, administrators, coaches? Who collaborates in your particular setting right now, and in what ways? If you could drop that in the chat, just so I can get a sense of how people are collaborating right now. You know, team meetings, common planning, PLCs. Little team meetings, data meetings. Nice, previewing units of course specific groups. That's great. Nice. Very good. So it does seem like there's a lot of collaboration. I know PLCs is such a broad sweeping term that I never know exactly what the picture is in that. I definitely have been in my past in productive PLCs, and then I've been in some PLCs that I think could use a refocus a bit. So we always want to think about why we should collaborate as educators. And yeah, Mike, I think talking in the hallways, I mean, that is a lot how when we co-teach together, a lot of that reflection time is right after that, right in the hallway, we're debriefing and unloading a lot. Nothing on this slide will be surprising to anyone in this room, but I just always like to name it that teaching mathematics is complex. It requires continual learning about the subject matter and how to make learning relevant and meaningful for students. And teachers just must be adept at moment-to-moment dynamic decision making. I don't know if anybody's ever seen one of Deborah Ball's talks where she is talking about discretionary spaces. And I think she counts the number of teacher decisions in a really, like in a minute or two. And it's just a ridiculously high number, and it's dynamic. It's not predictable what is going to be happening at any given moment in time. So the more we can collaborate, we can anticipate things and work together. If we can get the structure in place to have together time in classrooms, we can work together in these dynamic spaces. Elham Kazemi and her group at University of Washington is who I learned a lot about lab classrooms when I was coaching before I left to go to IM. When I was coaching in my school, we did what we called learning labs, which kind of replaced our PLC. We reframed the name to just give it a different feel and everything for teachers. And one of the first things we did, this is, we're going to call it a lab space. In a PD day, we just asked everybody to do a word splash of what do you think of when you think of a lab? And all of these words are so exciting. And this is exactly what we wanted these moments together to be as teachers when we were learning together. So we had this collaboration and exploring and discovery and predicting and journaling together. And I thought that it was really, this name Lab Classroom has just stuck with me as a really powerful space because of all the implications for the word itself. And like I said, Elham is the one that I took mentorship from all of her work that she did with math labs. And so I just wanted to call out how she defines at UW, they do what they call math labs. Where teacher, educators, school leaders, they're all working together and they experiment with instruction, they plan together, and they discuss instructional moments in the moment. So while teaching is happening, we might take a teacher timeout really quick and just brainstorm with one another what we should do right here. I'm not sure if how I should record that, or do you think this would be helpful to pull out this particular manipulative right now? We'll make those decisions right in front of students in real time. So everybody is learning in the room, and students start to see teachers as learners in the classroom as well. So at the beginning, I talked about this cycle of learning that we do, and I will get to questions. I'm trying to not look at the chat because I always get so distracted, but I will get to them. And Shannon, I promise you're pulling questions from the chat as well, right? So when I go with teachers, the first day that I'm there each week, we plan together. So it is their grade level team meeting that they have every day. And we take a deep dive into the to student work, the math, and then we plan for the lesson the following day. So what we look at is the student exit tickets from the day before. So what are students doing? What do they know right now? How do we build on the things that they know? So we try to take a really asset-based approach to our planning at digging into what do students know in this moment in time. Then we read through the lesson, we go through the goal, and we think about each lesson component and how it relates to the goal. So how is this warm-up starting to move us toward the goal? How is this activity moving it? How is the next activity moving us toward the goal? And what are students expected to do at the end with this exit ticket? So we just do a scan of the lesson in terms of the goal and relating everything back to the mathematical goal. And then we dig into where we think the critical components would be. Again, this collaboration. So when students are working together in this moment, what questions are we asking? And when we're wrapping this up, what work are we looking for to bring to the forefront to highlight the mathematics? So all of our planning, it's very meta. We're collaboratively planning to plan for collaboration. And we do all of that on the first day that I'm there during their grade level team meeting. The following day, I teach in one of the classrooms. I co-teach with one of the teachers. And this is the moment that is, we'll either both take different parts of the lesson. So I might take the warm up and the co-teacher might take activity 1, or we might switch. Or we might switch halfway through because we're stuck and we just need to hand the ball off to somebody else. But that co-teaching moment gives us so many interesting talking points, some of which we have right in the moment if it's something we can fix right there to get the lesson maybe back on track. If it's something that we just need to kind of get through and then we can talk about afterwards, we do that. So the reflecting piece, a lot of times just because of schedules that are so challenging, the reflection piece does happen to be either in the classroom or in the hallway as we're walking to the next space. But the reflection is the place that I wish there was more dedicated time. Now we do have after school PLCs once a week where we can go, hey, remember when? It's just not as fresh in our mind as it is right when you get done. But trying to make those spaces where you can reflect on the critical moments of things that you saw students doing and all of that. And all of that is en route to the collaboration that we want to see in our classroom. I do think that if you can even get parts of these going where it might be 2 teachers working together and co-teaching, I know we do, the principal is also involved. So just if you can get someone else in on it to get teachers in one another's rooms. I know in 4th grade or 4th grade, we had one time where I was teaching with a teacher and then we had teachers going into one another's room. The principal taught in one classroom to free up a teacher to go into another. So you do have to get a little bit creative, but because the principal and the coaches, they're all in on the planning, then it's our lesson and all of us are going back into the classrooms to teach our lesson. So everybody is invested. So we're not just putting somebody who hasn't been involved in the planning of the lesson in front of the classroom. So they know the students, they know the math, they know the activities that we're going to do because we've enacted them. So this is just such a critical part of collaboration, I think, that has such an impact on how students collaborate in our classrooms, because even a great curriculum can do a lot of the lift of putting the right tasks in the right places with great structures around it. But because every classroom is so unique, sitting and planning with one another within your particular context is just so important, and I think just elevates the level of collaboration and discourse and sharing of ideas that you can have in your classroom. So I just wanted to advocate for this. If you have the time and space, even to try it out in some small way of planning and co-teaching with one another, I would highly suggest it, because I think that is the way in which we really support students in collaborating amazingly in our classrooms. And Shannon, I think from there I have questions. Shall I stop sharing and turn it back to you?
Yes. Sorry, I'm trying to find all my buttons. Yes. Let me start sharing my screen again. And we had a few questions. I assume we're going to get a lot more in a second in the Q&A now that's over. But amazing job. I love seeing how engaged everybody was in the whole conversation throughout. This was amazing. So we had a couple questions around the video. What grade level were the students? And for the routines you mentioned and for these activities, would you hide the instructions or would you keep them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love doing that. I think either way would be wonderful. I think some of it depends on time that I had. So if it was something where I had a shorter amount of time, I probably would lead the directions, ask them what questions they had or what it reminds them of, and let them start to go. I think if I had the time for a little bit more of a robust discussion, then I would hide that and maybe just ask students what they notice and wonder about the images. And I think some of the same things might come up. Another interesting prompt that I've used before is just showing the images and asking them what math questions they could ask about this or answer about these images is interesting as well. So I think there's a lot of things you could do with that in order to get a lot of discourse around a task like that. But a lot of my decisions would just be based on how much time I had with students, because I know once I take those directions off and you open it up for them, then it just takes a little bit longer than you might have. So I think just thinking carefully through the amount of time you have would help you answer that one.
And did you say what grade level the kids were?
Oh, they're third grade.
So, and then we had lots of comments on traditional thinkers or resistant teachers and getting them on board with new techniques. And someone asked if we have any resources available on leading and facilitating these learning labs.
I'm trying to think. I did a lot of when I did a project for the teaching channel way back in the day on learning labs. So I know I wrote some blogs there around suggestions of how I got started. I think when I started, Elham's biggest tips for me, and this was just to make sure that everybody kind of was calibrated on the idea, is when we decided to change our PLCs to learning labs in my school I was coaching. The first thing we did is set norms with one another because we're going to be planning together. We're going to be sharing our own mathematical ideas. We're going to be in one another's classrooms, potentially, giving suggestions and doing things like that. So Elham's first suggestion was to establish norms and get what things are you worried about just out on the table. So if people are skeptical about the idea, I think I invite skepticism, because I think when someone is skeptical, they're trying to realize that situation in their world, and that's good. So we want to elicit all skepticism, and then we need to figure out a way to work around it. So I think the thing that illuminated that for me is I had a teacher one moment say, I don't want, when we did the reflection, they didn't want it to be about them. They felt like people were going to come in their classroom and it was going to be about them. And so we had to, really establish norms that where everything we're doing is student observation based. So everything is about what students know, what students are doing in the classroom. Everything is framed in that way. And it's really, our lens is on the students. And then we need to think as teachers how we can support them. So establishing norms is the first healthy thing, I think, for everybody. And then starting small. So it might be just getting in for one activity. So you come in and you do one activity together and co-teach it, plan it and co-teach it. And that might be a really great starting place, because finding 10 minutes of coverage to 15 minutes is much easier than finding a whole lesson to cover. So I think starting small and bite-sized pieces, I think teachers, people in general are just most bought in when they see it happening. So I think if teachers can see it happening with students, that's how we invite them to try new things. And it might not be in their classroom with their students, but if they can go into a different classroom and see it happening, maybe they'd be open to taking it back and trying it out with their students. So I know it can be hard, but I think there's some small structures that you could use to just get inching in the right direction.
Great tips. And I see some people have been asking about recording, and will it be available? And yes, you will get an email from Zoom with recording and certificate of attendance, so don't worry about that. Some other questions for Kristin. What are techniques for keeping students on track? Barbara says that they have curriculum that lends itself to great collaboration. but she struggles with keeping them on track and getting to the ultimate math concept.
Oh my gosh, Barbara, you're speaking to me so much. I used to teach a curriculum that was very like problem-based and great for collaboration. And I think looking back, the amount of times the students probably left my room not understanding what the real math idea was that day because I did not make it explicit was an alarmingly high percentage, I think. So I think the technique that has helped me is I plan backwards. So I think about the lessons, I look at the exit ticket that they're going to do that day and the synthesis moment that happens, or however you wrap up your lesson, what's happening right before that. And that cues me into what is the mathematical idea that I'm going to be looking for and asking questions toward the whole lesson. So that has helped me ask better questions as I go. So that's been one tip that's helped me get the mathematics. And then that also helps me choose the work that we're going to bring to the forefront and discuss. So if it was about representations, I might be looking for 2 different representations that I want students to connect in the synthesis. If it's different strategies, I might be looking for 2 different strategies. But I think that backwards planning and really being mindful of my time, I would spend so much time on the warm up. I loved number talks and I would spend so long on them and I would run out of time for what the math of the day was. So I think also just I had to set a timer for myself and the students started to know it and we just knew. So we just stopped at 10 minutes. And when we were done, if they had any more, we would journal about it or things like that. But I had to be really mindful of my time and I backwards planned from what the goal was of the lesson and the synthesis and then backward mapped and helped that guide my questions. So that helps me get there.
And I see a lot of people asking again about learning labs.
I know.
And I know you just shared some tips, but maybe this is something that we will send in a follow-up email. Since so many people are excited about it, we will put together something. So
I know. I know I blogged about it, Shannon, on my own blog. And so I could find that too, because I worked with, I was the math specialist and there was a reading specialist in my building as well. And we planned together learning labs. So sometimes we would have a reading learning lab, sometimes because all of our teachers taught mostly everything. So I know I'm doing a quick search to see if I can find it right now, but I don't know if I can find it that fast.
But we will definitely drop in the link if we can find it. If not, we will put something together and send it to all of you, since there is this is why these are so important, having these sessions, because we get to know exactly what you want.
Yes.
Someone else asked if you've used VR with any math lessons, any virtual reality classes, which I haven't seen before, but that would be something exciting to try, definitely.
Yes, I have never done that, but if anybody I do see that Nick has done it where he works for a cyber school. I have never done that. No, I think Desmos, like Nick said, is probably the extent of the tech that I use in my math class. So I think that's been the one I would go to, but I have not tried VR.
And I think we had one other question that I saw pop up in the chat. How do you relate collaboration with assessment? And from what I've seen, seems like when you have this collaboration, especially between students, where they can expand their thinking, then that would directly relate to how well they do in assessments if they're already kind of learning these things and new ways to think. But I will let you answer.
Yeah, I think I just look at assessment anytime I'm learning something about student thinking. So I didn't see the capital A assessment. So I'm going to take it as anytime I'm learning something about students. So we start every time we collaborate as teachers, we start with the student thinking. So we look at what students have done in prior lessons to see what they're building on. And so I would say that every exit ticket is an assessment of their learning. Every quiz that they take or checkpoint or whatever that middle of the unit thing is that you do, we use as a gauge of where we're like what we really focus more heavily on, or maybe what we adapt a warm up to revisit or things like that. So we use all of those as part of our planning. I know the group, I'm going to drop it here. The group out of University of Washington has a site where they've gone through and they've just done a great overview. I think they have some videos in there too, but I dropped that in the chat on Learning Labs. And then, like I said, I think some of mine is on the Teaching channel where they have some videos of a Learning Lab cycle that we did too, which actually might even be on that site. I'm not sure, but they do a great overview of all different routines as well too. So that site is one of my go-to sites for so many things. They do a great job.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are going to be very happy that you dropped that in the chat.
You lose a lot of time on that site. I lose a lot of time because they've got choral counts. They have all the math routines that you love. Oh, did I just send it to the host? Oh, 1 second.
Yeah.
Sorry. I did.
There you go.
Oh, thanks. Sorry about that.
All right. I think that is all the questions I see, which is good. That means that we covered so much. Not a lot of questions.
Yes.
So before we go, I just want to go through a few other things, more math resources for anybody out there. And Ryan also dropped it in the chat. We currently have 30-day free trials for Desmos Math 6A1. So you can go to that link to find more ways to make math amazing. We also have a brand new efficacy study where you can see how Desmos Math 6.8 improves student outcomes. So that would be wonderful to check out. You can hear more tips and strategies in the Math Future Lounge podcast. This season started, the 5th season, all around math anxiety and how we can help students in the classroom. And then, of course, you can check out more free math, professional learning, and our math webinars page. And don't forget, tune in not next week, but the week after for our last amazing math session. And with that, thank you so much, Kristin. This was wonderful, as always.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Shannon.
All right. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.